The Adewale family lived in the heart of Lagos, in a spacious modern home that symbolized their success and happiness. Nkem Adewale, a devoted mother and wife, spent her days ensuring her family's every need was met. Her mornings began before dawn, preparing breakfast for her two children, Dami, aged 12, and Ife, who had just turned 8. She loved the quiet moments before the chaos of the day began, savoring the sense of purpose her family brought her. Her husband, Tate Adewale, was a well-respected businessman, known for his charm and generosity. With his impeccable suits and warm smile, he had a magnetic presence that drew people to him. To everyone in their community, the Adewales were the gold standard, a family that had it all: love, wealth, and stability. Nkem took pride in being the anchor of their family. She attended every parent-teacher meeting, organized playdates for Ife, and made sure Dami was keeping up with his piano lessons. She also managed the household with precision, from balancing budgets to supervising their housekeeper, Grace. Her life revolved around her family, and she rarely paused to think about herself. To her, their happiness was her happiness. But over the past few months, Nkem had begun to sense something was off. It started with small, almost imperceptible changes. Tate, who had always made it a point to have dinner with the family, began coming home later and later. "Client meetings," he would say, brushing her concern aside with a quick kiss on the cheek. His phone, once casually left on the coffee table or kitchen counter, was now always in his pocket or face down when he wasn't using it. Nkem noticed how his laughter, once hearty and genuine, seemed forced, as though it were meant to mask something else. One evening, as Nkem was clearing the dining table after dinner, Dami approached her. "Mama," he said, hesitating slightly, "Baba said he would come to my recital last week, but he didn't. He didn't even ask me how it went." Nkem's chest tightened. "He must have been busy with work," she said, her voice steady. "You know how hard Baba works for us." Dami nodded, but his disappointment was palpable. Nkem felt a pang of guilt as she realized she had been offering Tate the same excuses to herself for weeks. The turning point came one Saturday afternoon. Tate had left early, claiming he needed to attend an urgent business meeting. Nkem decided to take the children to a nearby park for some fresh air. When they returned home, she went to retrieve groceries from Tate's car, only to find an unfamiliar scarf lying on the passenger seat. It was silk, vibrant red, and clearly not hers. Nkem's heart sank as she held it in her hands, the weight of suspicion pressing down on her chest. She tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it belonged to a colleague, or maybe Grace had left it behind when she borrowed the car last week. But deep down, she knew this wasn't a mistake. That evening, as Tate returned home, Nkem confronted him casually. "I found a scarf in your car today," she said, watching his reaction closely. Tate paused, his eyes darting to hers briefly before he forced a smile. "Oh, that? It must belong to one of my colleagues. She must have left it behind when I gave her a ride to the office last week." His explanation was smooth, almost too smooth, and Nkem's unease grew. She said nothing more, but the seed of doubt had been firmly planted. Over the next few weeks, Nkem became hyper-aware of Tate's behavior. He started wearing cologne more frequently, even on days when he claimed to be working late. His phone seemed to buzz constantly, and she noticed him smiling at his screen in a way that made her stomach churn. When she asked him about work, his answers were vague, and he often changed the subject. Late one night, unable to sleep, Nkem sat on the edge of their bed, staring at Tate's sleeping form. She wondered how they had gotten to this point. Was she imagining things? Or was her intuition trying to warn her of something she didn't want to face? Her mind raced with questions, but one thing was clear. The seemingly perfect facade of their marriage was beginning to crack. For the first time in years, Nkem felt truly alone. The life she had worked so hard to build was slipping through her fingers, and she wasn't sure how to stop it. As she lay back in bed staring at the ceiling, she resolved to uncover the truth, whatever it might be. The warm buzz of the Lagos afternoon hummed outside, but Nkem sat in silence at her kitchen table, the scarf she had found days earlier draped over her lap. She had turned it over in her hands 100 times, imagining scenarios that might explain its presence, but none of them felt right. Her thoughts spiraled, the weight of her suspicions growing heavier by the minute. She picked up her phone and dialed Amara, her best friend since university. Amara had always been the bold one, unafraid to call things as they were. If anyone could help Nkem make sense of this, it was her. "Nkem," Amara answered on the first ring, her voice bright. "What's wrong? You don't sound like yourself." "Amara, I need to talk," Nkem said, her voice trembling. "Can you come over?" Amara didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. When Amara arrived, she wasted no time. She walked into the kitchen, her sharp eyes immediately scanning Nkem's face. "What's going on?" Nkem handed her the scarf, the weight of her emotions threatening to spill over. "I found this in Tate's car. He said it belongs to a colleague, but..." Amara raised an eyebrow. "But you don't believe him?" Nkem nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's been acting so different, Amara. Late nights, glued to his phone, distant. I don't know what to think anymore." Amara set the scarf down and leaned forward, her expression serious. "Listen to me, Nkem. Men like Tate, they know how to hide things. But if your instincts are telling you something is wrong, they probably are. You need to find out the truth." "How?" Nkem asked, her voice cracking. "I can't just accuse him. What if I'm wrong?" "Then you aren't wrong and you'll confirm it," Amara said bluntly. "Start paying attention. Look at his habits, check his phone if you have to. And if you can, follow him." Nkem stared at her friend, conflicted. She had always trusted Tate. The idea of investigating him felt wrong, like a betrayal of her own values. But the alternative, doing nothing, felt worse. The next morning, Nkem decided to take Amara's advice. She began to observe Tate more closely, noting the times he left the house and the vague excuses he gave for his absences. Her suspicions grew with every passing day. One afternoon, while picking up Aoife from school, Nkem ran into their neighbor, Grace. Grace was a friendly, talkative woman who often shared more information than necessary. Today, however, Nkem found herself hanging on Grace's every word. "I saw Tate last week at that new restaurant on Borderland Road," Grace said casually, adjusting her purse. "He looked so happy. I almost came over to say hello, but I didn't want to interrupt." Nkem's heart sank. "He was there? When?" "Oh, Saturday evening," Grace replied. "He was with someone. I thought it was you at first, but then I realized the woman was younger. Very stylish." The blood drained from Nkem's face. She forced a smile, her voice steady. "Oh yes, that must have been one of his colleagues. He's been so busy with work lately." Grace nodded, oblivious to the storm brewing inside Nkem. "Of course. He's always working so hard." As Grace walked away, Nkem gripped the handle of her car door, her knuckles white. Her worst fears were beginning to materialize. Tate wasn't just distant. He was hiding something. Someone. That evening, Nkem barely spoke at dinner. Tate seemed unfazed, laughing with the children and scrolling through his phone. But to Nkem, his laughter felt hollow, a reminder of the secrets he was keeping from her. Dami noticed her quiet demeanor. "Mama, are you okay? You're not eating." Nkem forced a smile, her heart aching at how perceptive her son was. "I'm fine, darling. Just tired." But she wasn't fine. The tension in the house was suffocating, and Nkem struggled to maintain her composure. The children began to act out, sensing the strain between their parents. Dami became withdrawn, spending more time in his room, while Aoife grew clingy, refusing to leave Nkem's side. Late one night, Nkem sat alone in the living room, staring at the scarf draped over the back of a chair. Amara's words echoed in her mind. "Follow your instincts." She pulled out her phone and called Amara. "I think you're right," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "I need to find out the truth." Amara's response was immediate. "I'll help you. Whatever you need, we'll figure it out together." Nkem exhaled, a mix of fear and determination coursing through her. The perfect image of her marriage was gone, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty that demanded answers. She didn't know what she would find, but one thing was certain. She couldn't live in the dark any longer. The evening was cool, the kind of night that usually made Lagos come alive with energy. But Nkem felt none of it as she sat in her car, parked a short distance from Tate's office. Her heart raced, her palms clammy against the steering wheel. Tonight, she would get the answers she desperately needed, even if they shattered her world. Tate had told her he was working late again, finalizing a deal that required his undivided attention. But Nkem's instincts screamed otherwise. She had overheard a hushed phone call earlier that day, his tone playful in a way it hadn't been with her in years. It was enough to tip her over the edge. When Tate finally exited the office building, he wasn't alone. He walked alongside a stunning young woman, her figure draped in a sleek emerald dress that sparkled under the streetlights. Nkem's heart sank as she watched them laugh together, their body language intimate and relaxed. She quickly ducked down, her breath coming in short gasps as they passed by her car. A lump formed in her throat as she started the engine, trailing them from a safe distance. The drive felt like a nightmare. Tate and the woman pulled up to one of the most upscale hotels in Lagos, a place Nkem knew well from business dinners and special occasions. But tonight, its grandeur only added to her pain. She parked across the street, her hands trembling as she fumbled for her phone. Through the hotel's glass doors, she saw them enter, Tate's hand resting lightly on the small of the woman's back. He looked at her with a warmth and tenderness that twisted Nkem's stomach into knots. She snapped several photos, each click of the camera feeling like a dagger to her heart. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Nkem couldn't bring herself to leave, her eyes fixed on the hotel entrance. She wanted to burst through the doors to demand answers, but her fear of the confrontation, and what it might mean for her family, kept her rooted in place. When Nkem finally returned home, it was well past midnight. She had driven aimlessly for an hour, trying to calm the storm raging inside her. Tate was already there, sitting in the living room with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "You're home late," he said casually, as though nothing was amiss. Nkem didn't respond. Instead, she pulled her phone from her bag, opened the gallery, and handed it to him. "Explain this." Tate's face paled as he scrolled through the photos. For a moment, he said nothing, his eyes fixed on the evidence of his betrayal. Then he looked up, his voice defensive. "It's not what it looks like." Nkem laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and hollow. "Not what it looks like? You were at a hotel with another woman, Tate. What exactly am I supposed to think?" "She's just a colleague," he stammered, setting the phone down. "We were discussing business." "Business?" Nkem interrupted, her voice rising. "Do you think I'm a fool? I saw the way you looked at her, the way you touched her. That's not business, Tate. That's an affair." He stood, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Okay, fine. I made a mistake. Didn't mean anything, Nkem. I swear." Her anger boiled over, tears streaming down her face as she yelled. "It didn't mean anything? You humiliated me, betrayed me, and it didn't mean anything? How dare you say that?" Tate reached for her, but she pulled away, her body trembling with rage. "Don't touch me," she spat. "You don't get to do this and act like it's nothing." The argument raged on, words flying like daggers between them. Tate begged for forgiveness, promising to end the affair and insisting he still loved her. But Nkem felt only a deep, crushing sense of betrayal. The man she had trusted, the father of her children, had shattered the life they had built together. Eventually, the fight subsided, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. Nkem retreated to the guest room, slamming the door behind her. She sat on the bed, her body racked with sobs as the weight of the evening pressed down on her. She thought about her children sleeping just down the hall, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in their home. How would she protect them from this? How could she shield them from the cracks forming in their family? As she lay there, staring at the ceiling, one thing became clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. Whether Tate's promises were genuine or not, the damage had been done. And Nkem knew she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. The morning after Tate's confession, the Adiwale household was cloaked in an uneasy silence. The once warm and inviting home felt cold, the air heavy with unspoken words. Nkem awoke in the guest room, her body aching from a restless night. She stared at the ceiling, the reality of her fractured marriage sinking in. For years, she had poured herself into her family, and now the foundation she had worked so hard to build felt irreparably cracked. Her children, Dami and Ife, noticed the changes immediately. Dami, always observant, asked quietly over breakfast, "Mama, why are you sleeping in the other room? Did you and Baba fight?" Nkem hesitated, her heart breaking at the worry in her son's eyes. "Sometimes grown-ups need a little space," she said, forcing a smile. But we both love you very much. Don't ever forget that. But Dammy wasn't convinced. He grew quieter in the days that followed, retreating into his room after school. Ife, on the other hand, became clingy, refusing to leave Nkem's side. "Mama, are you okay?" she asked repeatedly, her small hands clutching Nkem's arm. Nkem did her best to reassure them, but the tension between her and Tade was palpable. They avoided each other in the evenings, their conversations reduced to perfunctory exchanges about the children or the household. The warmth and partnership they once shared felt like a distant memory. Tade, to his credit, seemed determined to make amends. He booked therapy sessions without prompting, attending them twice a week. One evening, he approached Nkem hesitantly, holding a pamphlet from his counselor. "I'm trying, Nkem," he said softly. "I'm working on understanding why I did this, on being a better husband and father." Nkem nodded, her expression unreadable. "That's good, Tade, but it's going to take more than therapy for me to trust you again." He nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I know, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes." Despite his efforts, Nkem couldn't shake the anger and hurt that consumed her. She felt betrayed not just by Tade but by the life they had built together. The idea of forgiving him felt impossible, and yet the thought of starting over terrified her. She felt trapped, caught between the love she still held for him and the pain of his betrayal. To cope, Nkem began carving out time for herself, something she hadn't done in years. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, she stumbled upon a dusty box of old art supplies. Inside were sketchbooks filled with designs she had created in her 20s, back when she dreamed of becoming a fashion designer. She sat on the floor, flipping through the pages, a wave of nostalgia washing over her. The sketches were rough but filled with passion and creativity. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of something other than sadness. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Nkem set up a small workspace in the corner of the guest room. She pulled out a blank sheet of paper and a pencil, her hands trembling slightly as she began to sketch. The lines came slowly at first, but soon her movements became fluid, the act of creating filling her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Her friend Amara noticed the change immediately. "You've been smiling more lately," she said during one of their weekly coffee dates. "What's going on?" Nkem hesitated, then pulled out her phone to show Amara a photo of one of her sketches. "I started drawing again," she admitted. "I'd forgotten how much I loved it." Amara beamed. "Nkem, this is amazing. You should keep going. Who knows where it could lead?" "Maybe," Nkem said, a small smile tugging at her lips. For the first time in months, she felt like she was rediscovering a part of herself that had been buried beneath years of marriage and motherhood. Meanwhile, the tension between Nkem and Tade continued to ripple through their household. One evening during dinner, Aoife spilled her glass of juice. Tade immediately snapped at her, his patience worn thin. "Aoife, can you be more careful?" he said sharply. The little girl's eyes filled with tears, and she turned to Nkem for comfort. "It's okay, baby," Nkem said, shooting Tade a warning glance. "Accidents happen." After dinner, Nkem pulled Tade aside. "You can't take your frustration out on the kids," she said firmly. "They're already struggling to understand what's going on." Tade sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know. I hate what I've done to us, Nkem. I'm trying, but it feels like everything is falling apart." "It is falling apart," Nkem said, her voice soft but resolute. "And we have to figure out if it's worth putting back together." As weeks turned into months, Nkem continued to focus on herself, pouring her emotions into her sketches and leaning on Amara for support. She started attending a local art class, where she met other creatives who encouraged her to pursue her passion further. It was a small step, but it gave her a sense of independence and strength she hadn't felt in years. Tade, meanwhile, remained consistent in his efforts. He became more present with the children, helping with homework and taking them on outings. He continued his therapy sessions and tried to share what he was learning with Nkem. But despite his progress, the wounds he had inflicted on their marriage were far from healed. For Nkem, the journey was far from over. She still didn't know if she could forgive Tade or if their marriage could survive. But one thing was certain. She was no longer the same woman she had been before his betrayal. She was stronger, more self-aware, and determined to prioritize herself for the first time in years. Months had passed since the night Nkem confronted Tade, yet the echoes of that evening still lingered in their home. On the surface, things had improved. Tade was more present, making an effort to reconnect with the children and to be a partner Nkem could rely on. But beneath the surface, the cracks in their marriage remained, and Nkem found herself standing at a crossroads she couldn't avoid forever. Tade's efforts were undeniable. He now attended every parent-teacher meeting, helped Aoife with her school projects, and made a habit of cooking dinner once a week, something he had never done before. The children, particularly Aoife, began to relax around him again, their laughter filling the house in moments that almost felt normal. Almost. One evening, as Nkem sat in the living room sketching, Tade walked in with a cup of tea. He placed it gently on the table beside her. "I thought you might need this," he said softly. "Thank you," Nkem replied, not looking up from her work. She heard him hesitate before he sat down on the opposite couch. "I know things aren't the same," he began, his voice tentative. "But I want you to know I see you, Nkem. I see how much you've been through, and I'm so sorry for what I've done." She paused, her pencil hovering above the paper. His words were genuine, but they didn't erase the pain. She looked at him, her expression guarded. "I hear you, Tade, but seeing me now doesn't change the fact that you didn't see me before." Tade nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it, if you'll let me." Nkem didn't respond. She turned back to her sketch, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. Nkem's internal conflict consumed her. She still loved Tade, that much was clear. But love alone didn't feel like enough. The betrayal had left scars that wouldn't heal overnight, and she often wondered if forgiving him would mean betraying herself. She confided in Amara during one of their regular coffee dates. "He's trying so hard, Amara, and sometimes I think we can make it work. But other times I look at him and all I see is the man who broke my heart." Amara leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "The question isn't whether he's trying, Nkem. It's whether you can let go of the hurt and rebuild. Can you see him as the man he's trying to become? Or will the past always be in the way?" "I don't know," Nkem admitted, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust him again. And I don't know if I want to risk my heart like that." Amara reached across the table, squeezing Nkem's hand. "Whatever you decide, it has to be for you. Not for the kids, not for him. For you." One night, as Nkem lay awake in the guest room, memories of their early years together flooded her mind. She remembered the way Tade had proposed to her under the mango tree in her parents' yard, his eyes filled with love and excitement for the future. She remembered the joy they felt when Dammy was born, the way they had stayed up all night just staring at him, marveling at the life they had created together. But those memories were now tinged with sadness. She couldn't reconcile the man from those moments with the one who had betrayed her trust. Could she ever feel safe with him again? Tade, sensing her hesitation, continued his efforts to prove himself. One evening he gathered the family for a game night, something they hadn't done in years. As they laughed and competed over a game of Ludo, Nkem found herself smiling despite the weight in her heart. For a moment it felt like old times, but as the evening wound down and Tade caught her gaze, she felt the familiar sting of betrayal creep back in. Later that night, Tade approached her in the kitchen. "I know you're still unsure," he said, his voice quiet. "But I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'm here, Nkem. For you, for the kids, for us." She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I appreciate that, Tade. But this isn't just about you being here. It's about me deciding if I can let you back in." Nkem found solace in her art, pouring her emotions into every line and stroke. Her work began to gain recognition, and she was invited to showcase her pieces at a local gallery. The night of the event, as she stood surrounded by her creations, she felt a sense of pride and independence that had eluded her for years. Tade attended the showcase with the children, beaming with pride as he introduced himself to her fellow artists. "My wife is incredible, isn't she?" he said to one of the attendees, his eyes filled with admiration. Nkem heard his words and felt a pang of bittersweet emotion. She was grateful for his support, but it didn't erase the lingering doubts in her heart. As the months stretched on, Nkem knew she couldn't delay her decision forever. She stood at the edge of two paths, one that led to rebuilding her marriage and the other to starting fresh on her own. Both were filled with uncertainty, but only one felt true to the woman she was becoming. One evening, she sat down with Amara, her voice steady as she spoke. "I think I'm ready to make a decision." Amara looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and support. "And what does your heart tell you?" Nkem's answer was soft but firm. "It tells me to choose myself." The Adewale family sat together in the living room for the first time in months. The air was heavy with tension, and the usual warmth of their shared space felt distant. Nkem had called for this family meeting, knowing it was time to address the unspoken pain that lingered in their home. She glanced at her children, Dami and Ife, sitting quietly on the couch. They looked nervous, sensing the importance of what was about to unfold. Tate sat across from them, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his expression solemn. Nkem took a deep breath and began. "I've asked us to come together tonight because we need to talk. Honestly, openly, and as a family." Dami frowned. "Is this about you and Baba?" Nkem nodded, her voice steady. "Yes, it is. And it's about all of us. I know you've both noticed the changes in our home, and I want to make sure you understand what's happening." Tate cleared his throat, his voice low but firm. "Your mother and I have been going through a difficult time. I made mistakes that hurt her and hurt our family. And I want to tell you both that I'm sorry." Dami's brow furrowed, his young face reflecting a mix of confusion and hurt. "Why did you hurt Mama?" Tate looked down, his voice breaking slightly. "Because I was selfish, Dami. I didn't think about how my actions would affect you, your sister, or your mother. I've been working hard to change, to be better. But I know I can't undo the pain I caused." Ife, sitting close to Nkem, leaned against her. "Does this mean you're leaving us?" she asked, her voice trembling. Nkem wrapped an arm around her daughter, her heart aching. "No, my darling. Your father and I will always be here for you, no matter what happens between us. You are both our priority." Tate shifted in his seat, his gaze meeting Nkem's. "I want to say something to your mother," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Nkem, I know I've apologized before, but I need to say it again. I am deeply sorry for breaking your trust and for everything I've put you through. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you can see that I'm trying to change. I love you and I want to rebuild what we had. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." The room fell silent as Nkem absorbed his words. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the weight of his guilt. But sincerity alone couldn't erase the scars he had left. "Thank you for saying that," Nkem replied, her tone calm but firm. "I see the effort you've been making, Tate, and I appreciate it. But rebuilding trust isn't just about words or actions. It's about time, consistency, and a willingness to confront the damage that's been done." Tate nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I understand, and I'm not giving up. I'll keep showing you that I mean it, for as long as it takes." After the meeting, the children went to bed. Their questions answered but their emotions still raw. Nkem stayed in the living room, staring out the window at the city lights. Tate joined her, standing a respectful distance away. "I meant everything I said," he murmured. "I know I can't force you to forgive me, but I hope you'll give me the chance to prove myself." Nkem turned to him, her expression unreadable. "This isn't just about forgiveness, Tate. It's about me figuring out what I want from my life. For so long I've put everyone else first, our marriage, our family, and I lost sight of myself. This experience has shown me how strong I am, but it's also shown me that I need to choose what's best for me." Tate nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "I understand. And whatever you decide, I'll respect it." The next morning, Nkem took a walk through their neighborhood, the crisp air helping to clear her mind. She reflected on the woman she had become over the past months, resilient, self-aware, and independent. She thought about the love she still felt for Tate, weighed against the pain of his betrayal. She thought about her children, their needs, and the life she wanted to create for them. When she returned home, she found Tate sitting at the dining table, looking over old family photos. He looked up as she entered, his eyes searching hers for an answer. Nkem sat down across from him, her hands resting on the table. She took a deep breath, her decision made. The story ends here, the resolution left open to interpretation. Did Nkem choose to rebuild her marriage, trusting in Tate's promises and their shared history? Or did she choose to start fresh, embracing the strength and independence she had rediscovered? The answer is left to the reader, a reflection of the complexity of love, forgiveness, and self-worth.